Hello and welcome to my channel Polyglot Reading. My name is David and this is the second preparatory video for the long-term close reading project on the novel Ulysses by James Joyce. If you're just getting started with this series of videos, I would recommend watching this introductory video first. In this video I explain in detail how this 1 year long close reading project of Ulysses will run from June 2025 and also which books we want to read every month until then as a sort of a preparation for this very complex novel. Today we are talking about the first of the books that we are reading in preparation of Ulysses, and it's about the Odyssey by Homer, this 2,800 years old epic poem which we are reading because the novel Ulysses is closely based on the structure of the Odyssey, and it also reflects in a modern form many of the motifs depicted in there. And this is, I think, already apparent in the title of the novel, because Ulysses is nothing other than the usual English form of the name of Odysseus. And so in preparation for this video, I have read the Odyssey in several versions. I listened to an audiobook of a more contemporary translation. I read a retelling for German students, and I also took a look at the classic 18th century German translation made by Johann Heinrich Voss. Very difficult to enjoy, by the way. So what I'm going to do in this video, I don't want to retell in detail the plot of the Odyssey now, because I think most of you who are following this project, you will have read the Odyssey, or you will read the Odyssey after this video. So what I would like to do is I will primarily concentrate on what struck me about the structure of this epic poem, and what motifs, themes, statements, and insights into our human nature and fate I see described in there. So and why am I focusing on these aspects? I'm doing so because I believe that it is precisely on these levels that we will find the parallels and the allusions that James Joyce integrated into his Ulysses. But first, of course, I will try to wrap up the plot in, let's say, about 5 sentences before I go into the details. So my video has the following 3 chapters, which you can also select individually using the timestamps. Number 1, in a nutshell, the plot of the Odyssey. Number 2, the structure of the Odyssey and some parallels to the Ulysses. And number 3, some themes and motives of the Odyssey. Let's start with the first one, the plot. So, the Odyssey describes the journey home of the Greek hero Odysseus, or Ulysses, after the Trojan War. After 10 years of war and 10 years of wandering, Ulysses finally returns to his home in Ithaca, where he reunites with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. And on this journey, or let's say on this Odyssey, Odysseus, or Ulysses, has to face numerous obstacles and dangers, including, for example, the Cyclops Polyphemus, or the sorceress Kirke, and the sea god Poseidon, whom he has turned against him. However, Ulysses also receives support from 2 other gods, Athena and Hermes. So with a lot of cunning and divine help, he finally manages to return home, to clear up the mess in his palace, and to resume his rightful position as the king of Ithaca. Okay, so that's the story, the plot in a nutshell. Very briefly and very superficially told. But let's move on to then my second point, the structure of the Odyssey. I find the structure very interesting because I myself was quite surprised that the Odyssey is not told chronologically and linearly, not at all. But here narrative techniques are used that I had actually thought were achievements of more modern times. The Odyssey consists of a total of 24 books, which can be summarized or aggregated in 3 large units. And incidentally, we also see this tripartite division also in Ulysses. More on that later. Let first back to the Odyssey. The first part, that is books 1 to 4, the first part begins at the point where Odysseus has already been absent from home for almost 20 years. So it sets in close to the end of the actual plot. And at this point in the story, Odysseus' wife Penelope, she is besieged by intrusive suitors who have taken up residence in her palace like parasites. So they are squandering Odysseus' provisions, they are drinking and devouring them, they're fighting for Penelope's favor. So they think that Penelope should finally come to terms with the fact that Odysseus, he's lost. He won't be coming back. He's probably long dead. And so she should marry one of them. So after all, she's a good match. Odysseus was king of Ithaca, so quite a wealthy guy. So what drives these suitors is not so much love for Penelope. It's greed and hunger for power. And there's also Telemachus, the son of Penelope and Odysseus. He has now grown into a young man, and he is extremely annoyed by these impudent and pushy suitors. So he would like to chase them away, but he does not yet feel up to the situation. And so he at least does what he thinks is feasible for him. He sets off on a journey to find his father, or to at least to find to get some news about the fate of his father. And so this part takes place shortly before Odysseus' actual return to Ithaca, which is, so this is more or less the narrated present that's close to the finale actually of the plot. And then the second part begins. There's books 5 to 16, which is now in most of its parts, it's a flashback in which the story of Odysseus and his wanderings is told. But even this is not done in a chronological order. Instead, first, um, Odysseus' situation at the time when Telemachus sets off to look for his father is described. At this time, Odysseus has already been held on an island for 7 years by the nymph Calypso, but now she lets him go on the instruction of the god Hermes. And however, short after his departure, Odysseus is again shipwrecked, and he ends up in the kingdom at the kingdom of the so-called Phaeacs. And there he's taken in by their king Alkinoos and his wife Arete. And now there, to the king and his wife, he tells the story of his wanderings in a flashback from his departure from Troy after the end of the Trojan War until one of his numerous shipwrecks brings him to the island of the nymph Calypso. And after Odysseus has told the story of his wanderings, now the plot and the time strands, they are now brought together, and the third part begins, books 13 to 24, which now deal with how Odysseus returns to Ithaca, where he first pretends to be a poor beggar just in order to scout out the situation and to understand who of his former subordinates is still loyal to him, and who has become involved with the greedy suitors. And he meets his son Telemachus, and he reveals himself to him. And then there's a bloody finale that could be imagined as a scene from a Quentin Tarantino film. Odysseus and Telemachus, they carry out a massacre among the suitors. They are all killed, and also those of the domestic servants who had become involved with them, they are also executed. And only then um, does Odysseus reveal himself to his wife Penelope, and then there's a night of love, a happy ending, and all is well. So, okay, why is this tripartite structure and so interesting with regard to the Ulysses? Well, because the Ulysses is designed not only in terms of content, but also structurally in such a way that it mirrors the Odyssey to a certain extent. The Ulysses is not divided into 24 books like the Odyssey is, but it's divided into 18 chapters or episodes. So you can't match these parts exactly in a one-to-one system. It's not quite that simple. But like the Odyssey, the 18 chapters of Ulysses can also be grouped into 3 distinct parts. And these 3 parts also reflect the way the plot and its time are treated in the Odyssey. In Ulysses, the first three chapters describe the period from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Bloomsday, June 16th, 1904. But like the Odyssey, not from the perspective of the main character, not from the perspective of Leopold Bloom in that case, but this part first introduces us to some important secondary characters like Stephen Daedalus and Buck Mulligan. Just as the first books of the Odyssey introduce us to the son Telemachus, to the wife Penelope, and also to Nestor and Mentor, who were important advisors to Telemachus. Then there's the second part of Ulysses, and it begins with chapter 4, and just in the Odyssey, where we finally get to see the main character, Odysseus, at the beginning of the second part. Here in Ulysses, we also finally introduced to the main character, Leopold Bloom, at the beginning of the second part. And as in the Odyssey, we also have a break in the chronology in Ulysses at this point. The narrated time jumps back to the early morning, and now it starts again from 8 a.m. And now this starts describing Leopold Bloom's day starting from 8 a.m. In the morning. So, and then the structural parallels between the Odyssey and Ulysses continue in this way and in similar ways. Chapters 16 to 18, the final three chapters, then also form the third and final part of the novel. They're corresponding to the return of Odysseus to his palace and the happy ending between Odysseus and Penelope. And so also the novel Ulysses concludes with Leopold Bloom lying next to his wife Molly in their marriage bed. So it does not make much sense at this point to go into much more detail about the structural parallels between the Odyssey and Ulysses. We will come back to this more frequently, surely, when we start reading the actual novel Ulysses in June. At this point, I would just like to point out that James Joyce himself assigns all the episodes of Ulysses to individual themes or characters in the Odyssey. And this information is not given in all printed edition nowadays. So for example, also the German, it is given in the large annotated German edition by the Surkamp Verlag. Contains this information. It's sort of a table of content, but many normal editions of Ulysses, unfortunately, do not contain this information. However, this information is freely accessible, available in the internet. In Wikipedia, for example, Wikipedia has an own article on this, which you can find under the keyword Gilbert or Gilbert scheme. And I also provide you the link to this article in the info box below the video. So let's move on to the third topic of my video, the themes and motifs in the Odyssey that might be picked up again in Ulysses. I think as a subtext underneath the description of Odysseus' wanderings and peregrinations and adventures, there's a whole series of motifs, of themes, and one might almost say educational life lessons that can be discovered. I suspect that many of these will also be taken up again in the novel Ulysses in a more or less modified form. And at this point, I would simply like to present a few of what I consider to be the most obvious themes and motives in the Odyssey. And we won't find out which of them are actually taken up in Ulysses until June. But with this incomplete list, I simply want to raise awareness to these additional levels of meaning in the Odyssey, so that using this background level, we can then go through the actual novel a little bit more attentively, and in this way it might be easier for us to detect also the parallels in the themes and motives between Ulysses and the Odyssey. Okay, the first obvious theme for me is the realization that as human beings, we cannot completely control our human life and fate and destiny. So there are always unforeseen events, surprises, obstacles, or external support that we can neither foresee, predict, nor understand. In the context of the Odyssey, this is explained by the intervention of gods, whom Odysseus has either antagonized or whose pity he has aroused. And so Odysseus' wanderings were originally caused by the wrath of gods such as Poseidon or Zeus. And on the other side, there are Athena and Hermes who often support him, to name just the most important ones. Of course, for modern human beings, it might be a bit more difficult to accept or to think about divine entities being behind these unexpected events. But I think anyway, still the observation is still valid that there is this element of things in our life that we cannot control, that we cannot predict, that we sometimes also cannot manage to understand. A second theme, I think, is that I see this description, this notion that people can easily be, so as human beings, we are weak of character. We can easily be seduced to succumb to the temptations of the senses, or the temptation to escapism, to escape the world, to escape reality, to allow ourselves to be lulled into an illusion and into intoxication or comfort, into state of apathy. And I noticed several examples of such a behavior, each with its own nuances, but they all go into the same um, overarching direction that I have just tried to describe. So, first example, the lotus eaters. Many of Odysseus' companions allow themselves to be seduced into eating lotus, which is obviously some sort of intoxicating substance that puts them into kind of euphoric state of intoxication in which they want to stay, they want to remain as long as possible. So it seems to be something like opium, like eating or smoking opium. So they become totally indifferent to their tasks and all their obligations, and all social ties become irrelevant. And then there's this story of Circe. Whoever falls for her charms is transformed into an animal, and even into a pig. So this is really a symbol of being really reduced to low impulses. And although Odysseus escapes being enchanted into a pig, he still allows himself to be erotically lulled by Kirke or Circe, and so he stays with her quite a long time. And then there's this incident with the sirens and their seductive songs. For me, it also contains this message that there are temptations of a nature that are very difficult to withstand or resist if you don't consciously prepare yourself for them beforehand in order to arm yourself against them, or in order to organize help to be able to deal with this temptation. And then there's the next theme, um, breaking taboos and transgressing human or divine laws and prohibitions. It usually doesn't pay off, but it will be punished or avenged in one way or the other. For me, others can be seen in this episode with the sacred kettle of Helios, about which Odysseus and his companions were clearly told and warned that these are sacred, these are sort of sacred cows, sacred cattle. They must not be slaughtered. But of course, the companions disregard this one day, and the punishment is not long in coming. Fourth, another theme is there are situations for us human beings, situations that seem hopeless, where there seems to be no good solution, where you're literally caught between a rock and a hard place. But giving up is not an option. I'm thinking here of the scene at the sea with this strait where Scylla lurks on one side and Charybdis lurks on the other side, and both dangers want to drag Odysseus into to his doom. But in the end, Odysseus, so he is not easily intimidated. He still dares to pass this strait, and so in the end, he even manages to pass this dangerous spot twice. And fifth point that I noticed is I think that despite being at the mercy at the mercy of either the favor or the wrath of the gods, or fortune or fate, or random, we are we are not presented with fatalism as a goal or an attitude worth striving for, but what the message of the Odyssey is that a rather determined, energetic action is necessary. Sometimes also a good deal of cunning, and so more or less true to this motto: help yourself, so God will help you. And of course, this is now very simplified, and this tension and relation between chance and providence and human free will or freedom of choice, even in the Odyssey, it's certainly far more complex. But I'm deliberately boiling it down to the level of simple mottos here. Firstly, because it's easier to remember that way, and secondly, because I also believe that in ancient times, these verse epics that were recited again and again, to be handed over from generation to generation, they also had this function. They had to serve an educational, they were serving an educational purpose. They had the function of conveying educational mottos and maxims for the young ones in an entertaining format, or in a format of a narrative that they could easily understand. Okay, sixth point is resentment and false friends lurk everywhere. And sometimes it is the very humble and inconspicuous ones, the swineherds like Ormaius, who in the end turn out to be your truly loyal and helpful friend. So it's not the noblemen of Ithaca who are loyal to the former king Odysseus. It's the simple, poor swineherd, like Ormaius, who is really faithful to him. Then next point, again, sort of a pedagogical educational maxim: curiosity killed the cat, or curiosity and boredom can lead to mischief and disaster. I want to recall this episode of The Leatherback of Aiolos, in which all the winds and storms are trapped. And then they are unleashed by Odysseus' companions out of sheer curiosity and boredom, and with disastrous consequences. And finally, number 8, woe to a society if the strong and powerful are not restrained by laws. For me, this is illustrated both in the example of the Lystrigons, who eat people, and by the example of the Cyclopes, about whom it is expressly, literally said that they were not restrained by any laws. So this is a pinprick against tyranny, and also against powerful people and oligarchs who pretend to be above the law, or to claim to be above the law. And I think a look at the current world politics shows us that the problem of the super rich and the super powerful claiming to be above the law and behaving like it has still not been solved, even 2,800 years later, after the Odyssey was written. So shame on us human beings. So these were 8 themes, motifs, or life lessons that I see as a potential subtext in the Odyssey, and I'm really curious to see which one of them we will encounter again in James Joyce Ulysses, in a modern form, of course. So that's all from my side. And now, yeah, I'm curious to learn, how did you experience reading the Odyssey? What special features in form, structure, and in themes did you notice? What stood out to you? I am really looking very much forward to reading your comments on this. And yeah, in a month from now, on March 16th, there will be the next preparatory video for the Ulysses. And the next video will deal with the Bible. Not with the complete Bible, of course, but we'll take a specific look at some of the stories in the Old Testament, those stories which are fundamental to the self-understanding of the foundation of the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. And also in the New Testament, with the Gospel of Matthew, or at least parts of it, as an example of a document that describes the foundations of Christianity, and also the key points of the teaching of Jesus, to better understand all the references and allusions to Judaism and to Christianity in the novel Ulysses. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Leave me a comment and a like, or subscribe to this channel. Have a great reading time. Hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye bye and ciao.